Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. Today's episode is going to be a bit more of a well-known title, as I'll be talking about Motion Twin's Dead Cells, the game which coined the term Roguevania. Now, while I will be giving an overview, I'm also going to be specifically going over elements of its recent free update, Rise of the Giant. Find out if I'm making my way through the game and its new areas had me feeling like a boss, or if navigating those recent changes left me full of malaise. So, the introductory story of Dead Cells more or less boils down to, you're the headless corpse of some guy being piloted by a floating, flaming blob, who's on an island that has gone completely to hell due to a mysterious sickness known as the malaise, whose symptoms are more or less characterized by mutations and being very murderous. And also, if you catch it, you die. Now, maybe you're supposed to do something about it? Or escape? Figure out who you are? Commit regicide? Really, the game doesn't waste too much time on the whys of what you do, given it just tends to throw you headlong into the fray, and the legions of adversaries that encounter you are more than happy to answer some rather pointed answers to what you should do for those inquisitive minds in the audience. And those answers are swords, by the way, or arrows, at best. That's not to say there isn't a story. There's definitely bits of lore to discover as you low-key banter with a few scattered NPCs or observe lore rooms spread throughout the place. But the narrative felt more like flavor than anything too central. You're not really all that apt to encounter a more final sort of ending that explains things unless you manage to clear the game on its hardest difficulty. Possibly twice. And even without delving into those things, the game is quite challenging. From the word go, you're essentially thrust into a labyrinthine stage full of murderous malaise-ridden marauders. Honestly, the game embraces the Vania aspect rather well, as it provides you with fast-paced and delightfully varied combat for you to wade into the thick of, dodging and parrying your way through creatures as you search for a way out of the stage. I mean, you can avoid combat to try and rush to the end, but the game also incentivizes bumping creatures off to help get around, since chaining kills buffs your speed, and also provides you loot. And whilst you may start off with a relatively limited armory at your disposal, the sheer amount of weapons you can unlock provides a lot of different items to add to your arsenal to overall master, especially given that you can swap between two weapons fairly smoothly. Given the amount of care placed into their attack animations and the distinct properties of the items, they all end up feeling quite different and lend themselves to allowing varied approaches in tackling the many maladied minions. There's probably not going to be that much more alliteration in this episode, I swear, folks. Probably. That said, besides combat, the game also draws a fair bit in regards to its sense of exploration and discovery, even beyond things like finding the odds and ends of lore lurking in its many passages. An astute player has many opportunities to discover secrets, whether they be wall chickens to consume, hidden portals leading to lethal obstacle courses, or the game's various blueprints, many of which can be acquired from enemies, but some of which are notably only able to be picked up from secret spots scattered throughout the stages. Now, some people may argue that the lack of backtracking might run contrary to the Vania terminology, but honestly, plenty of Castlevania games prior to Symphony of the Night were linear. And more importantly, even though you can't double back, you certainly can discover abilities which will allow you to permanently explore more of the map and kick ass in combat. Heck yes, wall running and pounding through the floor, among others. And most importantly, these abilities, tied to special runes that you can find hidden in the stages, broaden the paths that you can take in the game, as behind formerly inaccessible paths may lurk routes which lead to entirely different biomes with their own unique obstacles, enemies, and bosses. But that's a fair amount said to one part of its distinctive genre. So let's try and explore the other. See, Dead Cells is very much built around a number of staples of the rogue genre, though it would be more accurate to say roguelite. Yes, it has permadeath that will see you try, die, rinse, and repeat from the start, but it also allows the player a sense of progress between runs in the form of cells, a sort of currency that enemies may cough up and which can be spent unlocking weapons, making those weapons stronger, getting more health potions, or other upgrades, thereby allowing you a stronger start than your prior runs. Still, there are very much times where you end up feeling either blessed or cursed by RNGesus, given the levels are randomly generated, as is its enemy placement and the gear you're able to locate throughout the stages. You are granted a number of ways in which you can limit the randomness that's inherent in the game. Some are more upgrades, allowing you to narrow the options shops give you and thereby making them more useful. One is a rune, which allows you to limit the sort of items that can even appear in a game. And whilst the gear you find may be random, the mutations you gain access to at the end of the various stages are not, and considering that each one of these potent passive skills can dramatically influence your offensive and defensive options, that's pretty nifty. Especially if the stats you've been leveling and the weapons you've acquired synergize with them. So, it honestly helps that the leveling system is easy to grasp, as players only have 3 main stats to fuddle over and increase. It's simple, it's elegant. It's still not enough to stop me from getting greedy and running into challenge portals to get higher stats, or boot open blatantly marked cursed chests. I mean, sure, cursed chests do cough up great loot, like cells, crapload of cells, a guaranteed stat up scroll, and colorless items that scale with whatever your highest stat is, regardless of what the item type is. They also lead to you being cursed, which causes monsters and the environment to kill you if you so much as stub your toe or get sneezed on. But yeah, honestly, despite its overall difficulty, clearing the game isn't an insurmountable feat. And then you acquire your first boss cell, and holy shit. See, Dead Cells is delightfully replayable, and not only because of its generations of worlds and the sheer plethora of things to find and unlock in the various paths, but also because it has, as of the Rise of the Giants updates, 5 freaking extra difficulty levels for you to unlock, each more gleefully murderous than the last, and all of the enemies become more lethal. Creatures both new and old begin cropping up in places they weren't before. Screw you, invisible owl ninjas, and your means of replenishing yourself, and by that I mean your health, become increasingly rare. I mean, yes, this does open up new routes which only become accessible as you climb difficulty levels, and it also allows you to acquire new items that weren't available before. But it'll also see you dying a hecaton, and that's before even mentioning boss cells 4 and higher. See, this difficulty more or less hinges on A, even more grueling enemies, and B, malaise. You know that sickness afflicting the island? Yeah, it's something you can actually catch from mini-bosses in the final area, and should you let them hit you enough times without eating some food or drinking a health flask, it'll bleed your health faster than a hemophiliac stuck in a blender full of broken glass. The big catch to boss cells 4 is now everything can start infecting you with malaise, and even some pieces of food are afflicted with it, making the game into a much more finesse-oriented experience. I say between air quotes, because I am not finesse-oriented. But, this also marks a pretty good point to start talking about Rise of the Giant, and some of the neat stuff in it. Like, first off, Rise changed a lot. Like, there used to not be semi-invisible owl ninjas patrolling the hallways of the first level, and many others when you're on boss cells 1 or higher. But here we are! New enemy there to shiv you. It also introduces a bevy of other creatures, all of which have their own unique drops and a nifty new boss to execute, who lords it up over an entirely new stage. The caverns, they're spiffy and pretty large, have their own, secrets in them, and are basically an alternate penultimate level? Question mark? There's a question mark there, and that's because the term penultimate is mostly accurate, but not entirely, given that if you somehow not die long enough to reach boss cells 5, and then not die long enough to reach the normal ending of the game, there's a true final level. Bit of hijinks and an associated actual last boss to take on, so I guess it would be like the final level? I'm working on it. I'm still stuck at boss cells 4, and getting stuff in lower areas. Give me a bit. That said, despite the new slew of violent creatures to beat down, loot, or maybe just very casually avoid and sneak by, the game's also managed to provide changes that make navigating the higher boss cells less awful, Namely, a number of the mutations have been tweaked to interact with the melees, and either hinder it affecting you, or allowing you to manage it just a touch easier than you could before, overall increasing your life expectancy drastically. It's really nice, and whilst the number of people who will get to that depth of the game will likely remain limited, I imagine the number will increase given this bit of utility. Lastly, Rise of the Giants has added costumes. That's right, there's now cosmetics to find and unlock, which basically act very similarly to normal blueprints in that you pull them from the bodies of your enemies, with the only major stipulation being that these only tend to drop in boss cells. I mean, the bosses drop stuff, but the normal enemies, it's certain boss cells or higher, with a number of them only being acquirable at the highest end of the spectrum, so good luck in adding all of those to your wardrobe. Now, changing tack, I really am fond of the soundtrack for Dead Cells. Like, there's something really nice about just listening to the music for all the respective areas in the game, and wandering about kicking butt. It makes the whole mass beatdowns of infected denizens way more epic and heroic than it probably is, since, conceptually, some of this stuff is either total nightmare fuel, or possibly tragic, since they're, like, mutated infected zombie things. I try not to think about it too hard. On an aesthetic level, Dead Cells is pretty slick looking. There's a solid amount of variety in the appearance and animations of enemies, and the bosses are definitely impressive to look at. There's also a fair amount of telegraphing in those animations, which helps. Like, altogether, it feels fair when you're parrying or dodging. The environments are also really fun to navigate because of just how varied they appear. Each one has like a rather distinct flavor to the areas that you're roaming about murder hoboing in. And I dig the weirdness of the main character's appearance. Also, the fact that all the weapons have their own respective animations is really neat on an aesthetic and gameplay level. Okay, so this review literally gave me a headache to write. It's probably the ones that took me the longest to do, and that was because it was just so hard not to just gush about this game and get off track. Like, I have devoted maybe not an ungodly amount of time to Dead Cells, but certainly a mildly obsessive amount of time to trying to figure out the odds and ends of it, and ever working my way towards properly conquering all the challenges it has to offer. And that is still a work in progress. And honestly, the Rise of the Giants update just gave me more of what I wanted. I now got a whole new set of items and options to tinker around and experiment with. It also remixed the earlier levels to such a degree that it's made passages that were once familiar into, well, something else. And it gave me silly costumes to indulge in. That one's less important, but I still dig being able to dress up in, like, a funky neon costume. Anyway, if you haven't given Dead Cells a look, I gotta say, I wholly recommend it. It's a crit hit in my book, and it definitely deserves its reputation as being an extremely solid indie game. And it is apt to keep you busy for a long time. Anywho, that's a wrap, so I'd like to thank you folks for both tuning in and sticking till the end of the episode. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comments below, and, for those interested in more indie reviews or interviews with the developers, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified when we have a new release. Lastly, join our Discord, there's a link in the description and in the banner, so you become a part of our community. It's cozy there. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks. Oh, and PPS. We also have a coffee, which there is a link above in the banner, which if you would like to help support our editors and also me, feel free to toss some coffees over there, since that'll help me actually dive into more indie games. But yeah, bye for real, folks.